Hey, good afternoon to you. 507 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up, Bob Good, the congressman, will be with us, chair of the House Freedom Caucus, at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. An invasion on America's southern border continues yesterday in El Paso. Things completely out of control down there. Here with reaction, Mark Morgan joins us now, former acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection under the Trump administration and a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mark, good to have you with us again, sir.
Ben, thanks for having me as always.
Vivid images, of course, of something that just continues on our southern border. What did you think when you saw that, sir?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad you used the word continues, because what I'm seeing, Vince, a lot of the media is, oh my gosh, look what's happening. Vince, we've seen those vivid images continuing for 3 years. Remember, it wasn't that long ago where, remember, for about a year in Eagle Pass.
Yeah.
Eagle Pass, we saw images of a year of illegal aliens coming across. Remember in 2021 when we had tens of thousands of Haitians come across Del Rio? And in 2022, remember the vivid images where a huge, massive group of Venezuelans were illegally entering our borders, and they were bum rushing the border patrol carrying a flag. It wasn't a little flag. It was about 8-foot by 10-foot Venezuelan flag as they were invading our country and assaulting agents. This is just another continuing example of the chaos and loss at our borders.
The story that we've been sold so many times is that these are just desperate people who are approaching us hat in hand and they deserve asylum in the United States. But I didn't see that yesterday. That video demonstrated that was menacing on the part of military-aged males who were fighting with Texas National Guard members and slamming into the gates that were there to hold them back.
Vince, that's exactly right. And again, I'll say, look, I really encourage people to go back and pull up the images of 2022 when the Venezuelans were doing the same exact thing. And here's the issue, is what we saw in El Paso. It's been happening every day along all 2,000 miles of our border. We just don't see it every single day. I mean, border patrol agents are being assaulted almost on a daily basis. In the past 38 months, we've had 2 million gotaways. 2 million. And here's another thing that should shock everybody. Those images that you saw, those individuals in El Paso, just running over the National Guard, that's 99% of those were processed and released in the interior United States. Zero consequences. Every single one of those should have been prosecuted, should have been in jail, and immediately removed, but they're not. And that is exactly why they keep coming, because there is zero consequences. And everybody across this entire planet knows that, man.
You know, in the United States, we use riot control measures against American citizens if they take to the streets. See, there will be tear gas, there'll be pepper balls. There's all sorts of things meant to put down a riot. How come I'm not seeing anything like that on our border, even non-lethal riot control? Why wasn't that in the video yesterday?
Vince, those are all good questions, and that goes right to the heart of my point, is that there are zero consequences. Right now, this administration has told those on the front lines, do not do that. They are not authorized to use any type of means that you just described. I guarantee you, if I was the commissioner, as I was, I would be approving less than lethal, as you just described, right, to push these individuals back. But that's not what's happening.
Yes.
Because, again, it doesn't matter how hard you push, where illegally you enter. It doesn't matter, because you're going to be processed and released in the United States.
I remember in my visit to the border, I visited the southwest border, the San Ysidro port of entry. And when I was there, I noticed that there were these little flaps in the available wall there that were designed to be lifted by Border Patrol so that they could actually take a pepper ball gun, stick it through the flap, and fire when necessary when there was a threat approaching the United States. So this is like literally a part of the mission of Border Patrol, and yet you're saying they're not allowed to do that under Biden.
Correct, Vincent. This is a really good point of conversation here, is that the Border Patrol's mission has been fundamentally changed through this administration without congressional approval. Their law enforcement and national security mission has been supplanted. It is now, quote, a processing enterprise. Again, even when they encounter, there's no enforcement happening. They are catching them, processing them, and releasing them into the United States. That's why we've seen illegal aliens from 180 different countries over the past 38 months.
Yeah, we've seen a lot. The White House today is picking up on a line from MSNBC's Joe Scarborough this morning. They're both claiming, both the White House and Joe Scarborough, that the images we saw yesterday are actually Trump's fault. That by Trump's opposition to the legislation, the amnesty legislation in the Senate, that was bipartisan in the sense that Senator James Lankford signed on to it on behalf of Mitch McConnell. They say that Trump's opposition to that is the reason why we saw these images yesterday. In your estimation, Mark Morgan, what difference would that legislation becoming law have made to yesterday's events?
Zero. And it would have zero impact on the future of chaos and lawlessness on our border. It was not a serious border security bill. And I'm really sick of them saying this bipartisan bill. As you said, 4 Republican senators. There were more Democrat senators that voted against it than Republican senators voted for it. 4. And of course you had Murkowski, the typical Mitt Romney, right? All the rhinos that were there. Meanwhile, Vince, what we forget about is H.R. 2. H.R. 2 was passed 10 months ago in the House. Every single Republican in the House voted for it. It is the strongest piece of border security legislation that's ever been passed in our lifetime. It went over to the Senate, and what did Schumer do? Did he put it on the floor for public debate and open discussion? No. Did he try to put amendments to it? No. He just denied it even going forward and said he refused to talk to it. So if the Republicans really wanted this issue for November 2024, why would they have passed H.R. 2? And why have they been pushing back why Senator Schumer has sat on it for 10 months? Because had they passed that bill and the president signed it 10 months ago, about 70% of this crisis would have been fixed by now.
And the beauty of H.R. 2, in addition to actual border security, is it disincentivizes coming into the country because it makes it very difficult for an illegal foreign national to take advantage of us. There would be nationwide E-Verify requiring employers to establish that the people that they hire are not illegal aliens. That's a huge way to mitigate this, isn't it?
That's exactly right, Vince. Couldn't have said it better myself. And what H.R. 2 did is that it actually addressed the network of issues and loopholes that are in our current system, and quite frankly, the things that this administration refuses to do. You named a couple of them. Here's another one that H.R. 2 did, that Lankford's bill didn't do, and this omnibus that was just passed didn't do. And I'm shocked at Speaker Johnson, and I'm calling him out right now because he was the guy all along that was supporting H.R. 2, saying we're going to, quote, hold the line on H.R. 2. He said Senator Lankford's bill is a no-go, yet he just supported and helped pass a bill that actually is worse than Senator Lankford's bill. But one thing that H.R. 2 did that any meaningful border security piece of legislation has to do, it ended catch and release. As long as you're releasing those that come in our country illegally or file false claims, Vince, common sense, they're going to keep coming. So the Senator Lankford bill didn't do that. Neither does this massive omnibus that just passed. Neither one of those is actually ending catch and release. And this chaos and lawlessness is going to continue.
I got to think, I mean, you must think it's as crazy as I do, that the House has voted to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas. They've impeached him. Yep. And yet they just gave the Department of Homeland Security another blank check to continue the operation of selling out our country. Like, does that make any sense to you?
No, it doesn't. I mean, think about this, Vince. You're absolutely right. They just continued to give the secretary that they just impeached money to continue the chaos and lawlessness at our borders. Instead of ending catch and release, they gave them billions of dollars to get better at it. Instead of enacting policies that are actually going to apply consequences and deterrence to those coming to the borders illegally, they just gave them billions of dollars to manage the crisis after it's already in the United States. Yeah. And they just gave them billions of dollars to continue the policies that led to Lincoln Riley's death. They did nothing in this bill that's going to prevent the next Laken Riley. They should be ashamed of themselves. Speaker Johnson should be ashamed of himself.
The El Paso invasion yesterday, one of the features of it that took me by surprise, that I was concerned about, was all these members of the Texas National Guard were standing there, and they had just a handful of them, actually, but they had long guns on them. And I didn't see them raise their guns at all, and I'm not even certain that those guns are loaded. What's the point of having those guns out there if they're not even going to use them as a deterrent?
Well, so there's one tactic is a show of force, right? But here's the problem is generally we haven't seen this, because my understanding of what was happening is they were actually dividing them into groups, right, into different demographics. So they were dividing them into women and children and then single adults. And what my understanding is, this is just what I'm hearing, is that the single adult males started getting worried that they were going to be rounded up and removed, and then that's why they rushed them. Now keep in mind they had the offense as a secondary precaution. But so I believe that they just felt comfortable in the process, because traditionally everyone that's coming in illegally has just given themselves up. There hasn't been an issue. But I can promise you, after what we saw 2 days ago, Texas National Guard, they're going to be changing their tactics.
Yeah, I sure hope so. It's and then as far as the Border Patrol is concerned, I get the impression from the existing Border Patrol chief right now, Jason Owens, who just did an interview with CBS News. He seems to be signaling in his answers that he is actually very supportive of what Texas is doing, despite the Biden administration's posture towards Texas, and is almost trying to publicly call out the Biden administration to get them to do more. What do you make of what the Border Patrol must be thinking about all of this?
Yeah, look, right now, the chief of the Border Patrol is in a tough position, right? I mean, he still is the chief of Border Patrol. He's working within the administration. He's got to watch what he says publicly. I think he's trying to do as you said. I think sometimes he's been successful. I'd say other times I've been very critical, even though I think he's a good guy. But, just like Texas, look, I actually think the Texas National Guard showed extreme restraint there. And so I actually think that it should be applauded. And to your point, right now, for all the consternation that this and the gaslighting that the White House is trying to do, the frontline men and women, the Texas troopers and National Guard and Border Patrol, they're actually working together very well. They know that Texas is doing exactly what they wish they were able to do. And so all this gaslighting back in D.C. is just that. It's not true. It's all false. And if you look at some of the postings going out from Border Patrol, from the chief and other sector chiefs, they're trying to do just what you said, Vince. They're trying to get out there. They're posting more about, the gang members they're arresting, the murderers and the pedophiles, and they're really trying to get that information out there the best way they can.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I've got some breaking news from Texas. The spokesman for Greg Abbott released a statement to the Daily Caller just in the last few minutes, saying the mental gymnastics from the Biden administration are astonishing. Yesterday's surge in El Paso is the direct result of the unsustainable chaos President Biden has unleashed on the border. There's more to that statement, but pointing it right back to the Biden administration as they try and pass blame to both Greg Abbott and Donald Trump. Amazing what's happening. Yeah. All right, Mark Morgan, thank you, sir, as always. Really appreciate your commentary and your thoughts on this important subject, sir.
You bet, Ben. Thanks for having me anytime.
To the phones we go. Brian calling in from Front Royal, line 3. Brian, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnese Show.
Hey, Vince. Good afternoon, man. Hey, I just wanted to, we can solve this whole border crisis. We just need to deploy the Capitol Police to the border, and then the Capitol Police can use deadly force against these illegal riders.
Yes, and, you're totally right. You're totally right. In fact, during the events of January 6th, the only people who died that day were all Trump supporters. And, of course, they shot Ashley Babbitt right there in the building. And the guy who did it was lionized. He was treated as a hero. So here's our chance. We could send that guy's name is Michael Byrd. We could send Michael Byrd down to the border. He could be tasked with stopping the invasion, and then we could celebrate him again. That's not a terrible idea.
I mean, so then I think, when is Joe Biden going to issue Article 15s to the Texas Army Guardsmen for swearing at the illegals?
Oh, yeah, that's right. Somebody said this to me, too, yesterday. This is a smart point. Yeah, so Biden launches investigations into people just for doing their jobs. Border Patrol on horseback. It's like, we got to investigate these guys. How dare they do their jobs? You're right. One of the Texas National Guardsmen was yelling, "Stay the F back," trying to stop the invasion from pouring in. So you think that Biden may actually launch an investigation into that guy?
Well, I'm just saying, man, I'm being facetious that Biden is such a limp-wristed individual. He has no. I mean, who is it? Gates. Gates was right. Everything Biden touches turns to Shinola.
Shinola. That's a good word. That's an excellent word. We all know exactly what you're saying. Thank you, Brian.
The last thing I want to say, Vince, if I got time in, the last thing
Please.
I want to say, if that guy Bird did that to my daughter, I would track him down like the dog that he is.
I can't imagine being in that situation. Thank you very much, Brian. Let me see. Let me take Mike in Sunshine now. Mike, line 4. Mike, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Vince. You know, for 10 years, I ran a business in Florida, and I had, I think, 2 I-9 employees. They were not citizens of this country, but they had paperwork that stated they were employable. How is it that how many companies are employing all of these illegals? I got to believe there's a half dozen laws being broken between documents, personal documents being forged, tax laws being broken. It's unbelievable.
How much do you, Mike? How much do you think that Congressman Dan Goldman has an entire house crew of illegals? You want to bet him on that? Like, I bet you he has housemaids and gardeners and all sorts of people. They're all illegal. This is just a hunch. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, and is he paying his portion of FICA? I don't think so.
I don't think so. I don't think he's the Levi Strauss heir. That guy. Oh my gosh, this sniveling jerk. Yeah, no question. He's got a massive force of illegals all working for him at like unbelievable slave wages. Coming up, Congressman Bob Good will be with us. He's chair of the House Freedom Caucus against the $1.2 trillion in spending that was just pushed out the door. We'll talk to him about that experience. Hey, good afternoon to you. 5:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Today, the United States House of Representatives jamming through a $1.2 trillion spending package with all sorts of ridiculous spending in it, including sustaining funding for the Department of Homeland Security, led by the impeached Alejandro Mayorkas, which has, of course, been betraying our borders, opening them wide for foreign nationals to pour in. For more on this story, I want to bring in a member of Congress who voted against this package today. Congressman Bob Good is here. He represents Virginia's 5th Congressional District, and he's the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus. Sir, great to have you back with us. Thank you very much.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
This, even if you were, even if you were to say, okay, this is the kind of thing we should consider, we should vote for, I thought you were supposed to be able to see this legislation for at least 72 hours first. What happened?
You know, it's really concerning because we had our conference meeting Wednesday morning, our weekly conference meeting, meaning the 219 Republicans get together in the morning at 9 o'clock and meet for about an hour whenever we're in session. And when it was being discussed that we weren't going to, because that was Wednesday morning, so that was less than 48 hours or around 48 hours from when we voted. So, and we didn't have text yet. We didn't get it till Thursday morning. But when it was told, hey, we may not be able to do the 72-hour rule because we want to make sure we vote for this by Friday so everybody can go back home to their districts or go to their fundraisers or their CODELs. And that's when you have a taxpayer-paid congressional delegation trip, which I have never done, by the way, in 3 years. I go back to my district. I don't go travel out of the country on the taxpayer expense when we're not in session. But anyway, they said, you know, we're only going to be able to give you maybe 24 hours notice. And I made the point, well, if you're against the bill, I knew I wasn't going to vote for a bill that kept the Pelosi-Schumer policies in place that we ran against when the American people trusted us with a majority in November of 22. And when you knew it was going to be an increase in spending over the omnibus that we all criticized appropriately in December of 22 as the Dems were losing control of Congress and kind of the last hurrah for them, then I don't need 72 hours to vote against it. But what was really disconcerting was how many Republicans who were planning to vote for it and didn't care that they wouldn't have time to read it. They hadn't even seen text. They committed to voting for it. They didn't even know what they were voting for. They were just going to vote yes, because I said to them, you would think you would want at least the 72 hours so you would know what you're owning with your vote, everything in that bill, if you vote for it, you own that policy, you own that spending level. So very disappointing that Republicans would vote for it. However, a glimmer of hope here, or good news, that at least because of the hard work we did in the Freedom Caucus and our conservative allies in the House and conservative friends in the media and some other conservative groups, we shamed enough Republicans that at least they got a minority of Republican votes. I think the count was 109 to 102 against it for Republicans. Not great, but at least it was less than the majority. So it also, to your point, not just 72 hours, it violated our majority of the majority rule, where we're not supposed to bring legislation to the floor that doesn't have majority support from Republicans.
I mean, it's just madness. I mean, if you're a Republican who has said that it is unacceptable that non-governmental organizations are being funded to assist in human trafficking, then how can you vote for a package that funds those organizations yet again? That's what these guys did.
So to give money to the very things that we campaign against, you mean that securing the border should be more than just a talking point or a campaign slogan, but we ought to actually mean it. And by the way, you may recall this new speaker said many times over the past 5 months, not as much recently, he probably regrets that he said it, but he had said, the border's the hill we're going to die on. We can't use the spending fight. We can't shut down the government. We can't use the leverage of the appropriations process. We're going to kind of have to give on that. But the border's the hill that we're going to die on. And now, as we said, well, what does that mean exactly? What consequence are we going to suffer? What risks are we going to take? How are we going to exert our leverage and our power that we do have as a House majority to fight for that? Even after yesterday, when we've got the video from Texas that when you first see, you think you're looking at a third world country or a banana republic where our border personnel is getting overrun by the illegal alien mob, and yet we're going to still fund that Department of Homeland Insecurity. As a matter of fact, give them $3 billion more in this budget than they had last year.
Okay. So take me behind the scenes, though. What are the motivations here? Are these Republicans really that scared of a partial shutdown? Do they think that some long-lasting political consequence is going to really make them suffer? Or are they for the out-of-control spending here? Because I'm looking at some of the spending. It's crazy. $850,000 for a gay senior home, $15 million for Egyptian college tuitions, $400,000 for a gay activist group to teach elementary kids about being transgender, $500,000 for a DEI zoo, $400,000 for a group to give clothes to teenagers to help them compress their breasts and hide their groins. I mean, this is what? Why? Are they really that scared of a shutdown, or are they in favor of the weird clothing for children?
It's indefensible, and I think it's a mixed bag. I think on some of them, it's yes, they are afraid of a shutdown. They say, oh, we always get blamed for a shutdown. We always lose a shutdown fight. We can't have a shutdown fight. So they own the Democrat and the media narrative, the media talking point that it's always Republicans' fault. So why wouldn't we fund the government at our spending levels, our priorities in terms of policies, attach border security to it, send it to the Senate, say, Senate, don't shut down the government, secure the border, cut spending, and work with us on let's split the difference on the policies. We can't get everything we want. We only have the House and they have the Senate. We did none of that. We passed what the Senate would take to avoid the discomfort, the risk, the unpleasantness of a temporary government shutdown. And so some of them, they just don't want the government shut down, to your point. Some of them, they're just not willing to shrink government and cut spending because that always gores somebody off.
My God.
You got somebody's constituent group, you got somebody's K Street lobbyist and some donor class and somebody who's making money off whatever you're spending on. Some of it's that. Some of it is just, hey, the convenience of, the subordination to the company line or leadership that, hey, we don't work for the people back in our district. We work for the party bosses. We work for the speaker and the majority leader and the majority whip and those who donate to our campaigns. And we hope the people back in our districts don't really hear how we vote, and maybe they'll believe us when we talk conservative when we go back home. So it is a mix. It's a mixed bag, unfortunately. There are, about half the Republicans, I would say, don't really want to do conservative stuff. And then half who do want to do conservative stuff, they don't want to do it if it costs anything or if it risks anything or if it brings consequence to your own ambitions, your own political career, your own aspirations, or maybe your own reelection.
Mike Johnson was hired to be Speaker of the House on the idea that we need to return to regular order, that we can't have these ridiculous, omnibus spending packages anymore. You need all of these distinct spending bills. They need to be thoughtfully considered before they're passed. And that's not what's happening. I saw today that at least in terms of a threat, Marjorie Taylor Greene did raise a motion to vacate as a possibility here. She's being pretty explicit that she's basically firing a warning shot against the current speaker. How concerned are you about his leadership right now?
Well, I'll tell you what I told him. I told him this past week that, those of us who were part of creating the opportunity for him to become speaker have no ability here to defend him as speaker, to say, hey, here's how things are different, because we continue to pass all the major spending bills with predominantly Democrat votes. Democrats voted for this about 90%. I guess that's an improvement, because the last one 2 weeks ago, they voted for it 99%. This time it was only about 90%. And again, at least the Republican opposition to it grew. But we're still, can you imagine if Nancy Pelosi or when she did have the majority, that she would have ever passed legislation that 90-something% of Republicans voted for it? I'm sorry. Yes, 90-something% of Republicans voted for it when they had control. She would never pass legislation that was palatable to us. But yet we do that. And the American people trusted us with a majority to make a difference, to fight for them. You don't win every fight. You can't do that when you've only got the House with such a narrow majority. But you will win none of the fights that you don't enter into.
How could we have changed the outcome here, Congressman? Obviously, this is a terrible deal. Do lawmakers respond when voters call their offices? I feel like, when it came to the amnesty package that the Senate considered a couple weeks back, there was a groundswell of conservatives who began calling in and going, this is crazy. Do not sign on to this. And that did have the effect of helping to kill that on Capitol Hill, which was a good thing. Are there ways that we can be more involved in killing bad legislation?
Yes, and you're exactly right. That was a win for the American people just, a month ago or so, when that became untenable, too uncomfortable it didn't ever make it to the House, but the Senate killed the amnesty bill combined with the Ukraine funding bill, masquerading as a border security bill that would have literally made it worse. So thankfully, Conservative Nation rose up. Some of the conservative members of the House Freedom Caucus and conservative allies in the House, conservative media groups, conservative media pundits and talk show hosts like yourself, and the outside groups, the Heritage Foundation and others like that, rose up and just crucified it appropriately. And the Senate Republicans chickened out and killed it. Even Mitch McConnell eventually came around to the reality of it. So yes, it takes all hands on deck. It's difficult to turn this Titanic that's been going in the wrong direction. That is the D.C. swamp. We cut off the head of the swamp creature when we removed the speaker 5 months ago, but the swamp strikes back. It regenerates. It's bigger than just any one person, as we see. So yes, yes. If you're calling someone who represents you, now don't waste your time calling people who don't and flooding because first thing they want to know is your zip code. If you're not in their district, they're not going to care because they know you can't vote against them. But if you can vote for or against that person, that does carry weight. And that when they're hearing overwhelmingly, now if you got a principled person who's doing what they know is right, they're likely not going to cave because they've got pressure to do what's wrong. But not everybody in Washington is courageous. Not everybody in Washington is principled, and a lot of them just want to get reelected and be able to stay in Congress. So yes, they're influenced by their constituents when they hear from them.
My colleague here on WMAL, Dan Bongino, I heard him talking about a week or so ago. He said that congressional offices, you can tell me if this is true or not, Congressman, that if they receive a call from someone who says, hey, I'm a voter in your district, will congressional offices actually check voting records to see how often that person is voted when they consider how high to place the weight of their constituent call?
I would say certainly we do not do that, and I'm not aware that they do that. And I would say the reason probably why, just being pragmatic there, is we get about 3,000 contacts a week.
I bet.
It's about 3,000 a week. So as you might imagine, a lot of research is not able to be done into each one of those. Frankly, you're just trying to respond to all of them, and we do that. But it takes obviously a lot of work, a lot of time to try to respond to those, and we do respond to every one of them in writing. So no, at least to speak for our office, we certainly aren't able to do that, and I wouldn't guess that many offices would. So that's probably a bit of a myth.
Interesting. All right. Very interesting. So it is frustrating to see this. Now, also frustrating is the news today that Congressman Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin said that he's done. He had already announced that he was going to leave at the end of his term, but now he's saying he's leaving on April 19th. The effect of that, as I understand it, is that in his unique situation in Wisconsin, there won't be a replacement for him because of the date he's leaving. If he left today, they would be able to replace him, and there would be somebody in that seat before the end of this Congress. That's not the case case, if he leaves on April 19th. What is that? Why would a Republican, somebody who comes into Congress with an expectation that they're going to make the country better and hold back the Democrat agenda, why would they do favors for Joe Biden and company?
Really incredible. Can't defend it, can't explain it. I think that'll take us to 218 to 214. So you've heard like a one-vote majority. What that means is you can spare one at 218 to 14 because you could still win at 218 217, 217 to 15. But if you lose two, you cannot. Now you're tied at 16. So you effectively have a one-vote majority, even though it's 218 to 214 with those numbers.
Got it.
So the most narrow majority in the history of the country. And in fairness to the Speaker, he has a very difficult situation because he only is Speaker because the previous Speaker failed so miserably and left him so far behind the eight ball with a situation no one should have been in. Secondly, we've got the most narrow majority in the history of the country. And yes, why would members leave us in these situations? Every state is different in terms of the rules for their state on how they replace a member. But, it's really unfortunate. We've had several Republicans leave before the term is out, couldn't even finish it through the end of the year so that we'd be able to seamlessly, hopefully, replace them. And certainly Gallagher, I think, is in a good Republican district, so we ought to be able to replace him. But it is unfortunate in the short term.
But it's a sabotage. I mean, that's not a good. It's legitimately it's literally designed, unless they have some sort of unique, really extraordinary crisis going on in their lives. It appears to the rest of us like to be an active sabotage of the Republican conference.
Well, I don't know what his reason is, and I don't know him very well. We don't really caucus together, so I don't want to speculate on motivation. I'll just say it's disappointing, and you'd like to think everybody would serve out their term in the best interest of the country and the best interest of their constituents, so it's disappointing.
Yeah, that's the whole reason you go in the first place, I would think. Congressman Bob Good, thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate that, and thank you for voting against this nastiness. All right, remember the New York Post and their reporters, Jenny Terr down there, yesterday in El Paso, they were the ones who captured the video footage of all of those illegal aliens storming our border right through the Texas National Guard. Jenny Terr has posted an update just in the last minute or so, and it says crazy as, well, you've come to expect this level of craziness. The Biden administration doesn't want you to see these images anymore. And here's how we know. Jenny just posted a photo. Members of the Border Patrol are now hanging a sign in the vicinity of where that scene was in El Paso. And the sign, all capital letters, says, members of the media, please stay off of the ramp and away from the sliding gate. Do not disrupt U.S. Border Patrol operations by being in the way of transportation vehicles. And then in all capital letters, do not attempt to make contact with migrants unless authorized by U.S. Border Patrol officials. And then there's a number here for other inquiries to the Border Patrol, and you've got the Border Patrol logo there. Make no mistake, this is the Biden administration telling the few members of the media who are even interested in covering this story, and it's a limited number. It is a very limited number. In fact, we interview all of them here on this show. That's it. That's the full extent of it. The Biden administration is warning them they are not to speak to human beings who illegally invade our country without their prior permission. Now, that's a ridiculous blanket statement, and one that I don't expect these members of the media to actually follow. They're going to talk to people and find out, hey, why are you here? Why did you come to America? Who invited you? Why do you think you'll stay? What president made this possible? On and on and on, and you'll get those answers always and everywhere. Joe Biden did this. It's a blatant First Amendment violation if the Biden administration thinks they can stop them from speaking to these people. But here, once again, big sign up now, Biden administration warning members of the media not to make contact with, quote, migrants unless authorized by U.S. Border Patrol officials. They're drunk on power. Deeply, deeply drunk on power. Okay. Coming up, we, of course, have the great one, Mark Levin, is going to be up next. And have you got your tickets to the Free Speech Forum yet? You should do that. Go to WMAL.com. Get those Free Speech Forum tickets. I got an update today, and it turns out there aren't that many left. So if you've been contemplating it, this weekend may be the time to pull the trigger, because I can't wait to see you, and I hope you make it there. That'll be at the Birchmere in Alexandria, June 2nd, the Free Speech Forum. God bless you. Please have a great weekend. Mark Levin's up next here.